Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. My name is Dina Pearlman, and I want to welcome you all to the ARP2600 Synthposium and Fundraiser. Our first guest is Jean Michel-Jarre. He will say a few words about the iconic 2600, and we will have a full interview that will be available at the encore show of this program after the full day. Welcome, Jean-Michel. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. We are really honored to have you with us.
Thank you, and thank you, Diana, also to have organized this kind of a celebration of one of the main iconic instruments of electronic music, the ARP2600. And of course, on a personal point of view, I would start to say that it's one of my own musical pet. I've been in touch. I've been very lucky, very privileged to actually, believe it or not, to be in contact. It's end of 1971. It was probably the first instrument in Europe, probably, or one of the first, and it was like a kind of fantasy coming true, because in those days it was very difficult in Europe to have access to a real big modular. It was very, very expensive. I got later on 2500, but the 2600 also was a revolution, because it was for offering all the possibilities of a pure modular, but also with the fact that because it's semi-modular, even without cables, you were able to create some electronic sounds like Minimoog would do it, or like in Europe the VCS3, Putney, AKS, but with also a very unique sound. And actually the different generations of 2600 also marked also different steps of electronic music, and different for me, different way of using the instrument. And of course, the second one, the one with the gray printing, with the famous filters inspired by Moog, which we would say like this, we would put it like this, was absolutely stunning. And this instrument, I would like to tell all our listeners and friends listening to us, what makes the sound of this instrument so special is, I don't know if a lot of people know that, but it's a very, very fun. Most of the time, you know, unique sounds or unique, very unique creative process are coming from accidents. And in this particular model, you have a leak between the VCF and the VCA, creating a click at the beginning of the sound. And that click, this click, was actually responsible for this kind of very harsh attack, a very hard attack, totally unique if you compare for the Moog. The Moog, for instance, has this kind of very organic and round sound, where the ARP2600 has this kind of very sharp attack that is very, very unique. And this is coming from the fact that you had this kind of tiny leak, letting a kind of click before on the attack. I mean, enhancing and increasing the feeling of the attack. And I must say that it has been until now one of my basic instruments for lots of categories of sounds. I mean, we know after a while when you are privileged enough to have different hardware synth, the 2600 is filling a lot of different area and sectors. You can create, of course, to do a lot of sound design, and over the history of the ARP2600, it has been massively for soundtracks, for theaters, for operas, for lots of creative forms. a fantastic sound design instrument, but also on a pure musical point of view, you can actually play the instruments for a lead part. You can, of course, achieve fantastic sequences, and it's the way I used it with the harp sequencer, and then with other sequencers, my own sequencers built in house, I would say, and also the fact that it has a very, in my opinion, a very poetic approach, if I can say that. Because the fact that you don't have knobs, but you have these faders, and it's a very tactile instrument, very organic instrument. Along the years and even the first month, it's very strange to say that, but I really developed a kind of intimacy, a kind of friendship. It's always, when I go back to the ARP2600, even now, even nowadays, it's always like going back to a dear friend. And this is, you don't say that to a lot of instruments. I probably Keith Richards would say the same about his guitar, but you know, it's something that is very special, and not every instrument is able to provide this kind of feeling. And also, I would like to say more generally that I think that 2600 really helped a lot to make understand the difference between a machine and a musical instrument, because the amount of instinct you can use when you are approaching the instrument, because you don't have to put any kind of cables, and you can go very far, of course, and very deep in the machine with cables. But even without cables, just by just improvising, I mean, you let the instruments drive. I mean, you let the instruments driving and just taking the control. And it's really what I like. And the other thing also, which is very special, are the two speakers with the reverb. Because also having a built-in speakers, it's not a gimmick. In days where at all times, from yesterday and today, okay, you have your own speakers in the studio. Okay, you can plug it in and that. But the fact that you can just switch on the machine, and then instantly you have this instrument that it's transforming an electronic instrument into an acoustic one, like when you're playing acoustic guitar or a violin or clarinet or saxophone. You don't need anything else. You're just providing the sound directly. And the spring reverb is also creating an instant environment around your sound, an instant, I would say, an instant real acoustic. I would say a real acoustic, not feeling, but acoustic relationship with your ears, and it's something very special with your body. And also the fact that I used it so much for doing noise by shaking. I shouldn't say that too much, but you know, by shaking the 2600 and creating this kind of explosion, thunder. So thunder type of sound effects. And you know, it's a very physical instrument. It's what I would like to share with the people who are listening to us and who are unfortunate not having been in front of a real one. And I must say that, you know, the tribute that Korg did recently, and I thanking Korg with of course working with the engineer having developed the 2600 first time. I mean, it's a real good instrument. It's not only a copy, it's not a clone. It's very faithful to the original, and it's worthwhile to be mentioned, because it reminded me the first time I got my first one. And I will finish that as a fan of the 2600. I have 3 in the studio plus the new one.
Oh.
So and on stage, when I recently I did a mini tour in theaters in Europe where I had no MIDI. We were just playing live without MIDI sequencers, and suddenly that was a few years ago, and I used a few 2600 to play the the different part of the arrangements. And the sound we have, the texture we have also live is absolutely amazing.
Wow, wonderful. So many things that you say are resonating with me. I am very, very moved and inspired by your recounting your relationship with this instrument. I think my father would have been extremely excited to hear about this, because part of the impetus behind making this instrument so wonderful was to have it be a tool that people could really use. It should not to be obscure, not to be mysterious, but to be accessible. And if anyone who knew my dad well would know that he was very interested in people using things and making things ergonomic and making things attainable, usable, something someone could do with their hands. He was the kind of person who liked to tinker and to do things, always busy with his hands. And so that this is a very, very interesting revelation. And I really thank you for this wonderful opening statement. Thank you.
You said two words, very important words about the 2600, ergonomy and accessible. And if we had to resume the 2600 with two words, I think that these ones are the right ones.
Thank you. Thank you. So I have some specific questions, some by a few of my associates that are great fans, and some of my own, and some of them have sort of merged a little bit. So we'll start back in the beginning a little bit. Your work with synthesizers preceded the ARP 2600. Which synthesizers did you use in your work before the 2600, and how and when was your first encounter with it?
Okay, my first contact with electronic music was back in time when I was a student in the late 60s, and in the Music Research Center in Paris, founded by Pierre Schaeffer, the father of musique concrète, where we were using tape recorders, sellotape, and scissors to make electroacoustic sound. And in those days, it was even before the era of synthesizer, particularly in Europe, and we were using basically oscillators, filters, that we were stealing to the French public radio, the equivalent of the French BBC. They were using oscillators, filters, and all these kind of machines for maintenance for the broadcast system. And then we took them and we took banks of course, using banks of oscillators to create what a kind of synthesizer. And quite sophisticated, because we had lots of oscillators, much more than 3 or 6. We had maybe a bunch of 20 oscillators with some filters, most of the time just low pass and high pass. And then that was really my first exploration in electronic music. Then my first personal synthesizer has been the VCS3 from EMS, the British one, the Putney. And I remember that was very symbolic, because I sold, as a teenager, I sold my electric guitar, my amp, and my electric train that my grandfather built when I was a kid. Then I to the flea market. At the flea market, I sold all that, and then I paid a ticket to go to London and to buy one, what was for me the grail of electronic music, the VCS3, and it has been my first synth. And then the second one has been the 2600.
Do you still use the EMS?
Yes, I still use EMS and the 2600 almost like a fetish. I have like a maniac for every project. The 2600 and the EMS Putney, they have to be in. They have to be part of the game.
I will just read you a part of this excerpt. This is a quote when you were being interviewed with Red Bull. in which you say, from the early 90s, the whole techno scene expanded with plugins and emulations of instrumental sounds, which were fairly unconvincing digital replicas of analog sounds. It's not that I prefer analog to digital, quite the opposite, in fact. I think the two can coexist perfectly well together, and my music is proof of that. But there comes a time where we have to admit it's not the same thing. And skipping forward, after having weighed up the advantages of the virtual, today we are realizing that we are made of flesh and blood and have an absolute need for an emotional and tactile relationship with our instruments. So I read this to you because one of the interesting things about ARP2600 50 years later is the reemergence, which you touched upon in your opening statement. And that is, why do you think young people are craving to use analog, semi-modular, modular, Eurorack, something where they can plug and play? Why do you think that is? Does that support your statement?
Yeah, it's a very important, it's a very interesting question. I think that first of all, we know that these days digital is progressing every day, improving every day, and of course you can have fantastic results with the digital plugins and virtual instruments. Having said that, as you were quoting me, we are made, by the end of the day, we are analog animals, and we are made of, as I said, of blood and flesh. And what does it mean? It means that also the ergonomy is very important. It's still a mystery to say that all these MIDI controllers these days are made for mouses or rabbits, not for human beings, very small. I mean, one of the successes of 2600 is actually the proportion is exactly the right proportion for a human being size, a normal standard one. And then it's like, you know, you're in front of an instrument at the size of a human being. And it's, of course, changing the relationship with sounds. Even with your brain, we know that I mean, the mechanics of our body is very important. The body language is very important in the result of the music itself. And of course, nothing is replacing nothing. It means, by other words, that we have, whatever we do, we are depending on the technology. It's because the violin has been invented that Vivaldi exists. Because the ARP2600 exists that somebody like me and some others are able to do the music we are doing today. And what I've done without technology, I would have done maybe painting or playing the violin. And actually, my mom was telling me, why didn't you study why didn't you playing violin instead of synthesizers? Because it would be much easier to travel.
I understand.
But you know, the 2600 is an ideal portable instrument because it's actually smaller than a cello or much easier to carry than a piano. You know, so all that is irrelevant. What I want to say to answer to your question is actually today what is great is you can have best on both worlds, and actually after, you know, it's you know, I'm at the moment very involved in VR and virtual reality. I love it. I think it's really great because it's another way to express yourself, to express emotions. It's a new art form, but it doesn't mean that it's going to replace a live performance. It's another thing. It's like cinema and theater, two different things. So analog and virtual instruments, it's the same. You don't do the same thing. And actually, what's great at the moment is the reason why I think today I'm not talking of the economy or the financial side of the music business, but it's one of the best moments to do some music because you have lots of possibilities. You can mix actually the quality and the efficiency of some softwares and virtual plugins. At the same time, you can spend hours to explore with the 2600, with a Eurorack, or with modular. It's something different. But I think we need both.
I think so too. There's a sort of futuristic view about having both. I remember watching, I was a science fiction fan when I grew up, as my father was, watching Star Trek and being amazed to see somebody in a spaceship playing a cello. And it suddenly made me realize that if an instrument is valid, it is timeless. It does not have to necessarily be of its time to be played in the present moment.
Yeah, and I think I know what you mean, because I'm a big sci-fi fan myself, even today, more than ever. I think that, you know, a 2600 could be like the cello of Dune. You know, Dune is going to be released now, and you could have a 2600 in a movie like this, and it's in the story of Dune is in 10,491, I think, and 2600 could have its place there, as the cello in Star Trek, the same thing. And you know, it's very interesting to see that nowadays an instrument such as the ARP2600 is part of the history of musical instruments, like the clarinet, the saxophone, the violin, the ARP2600. It's the same. It's the same part of the community of musical instruments.
Yet I remember when I was a little girl, I remember hearing that there was pushback from, say, orchestral musicians, because there was a fear that these synthesizers were going to replace traditional musicians. I remember that so well. And yet that hasn't happened. And the beauty, I think, of synthesizers is they've created a new library of sounds that, rather than having to sound like a violin or something else, it can actually sound like itself.
You know, I have an idea for you, because, you know, Will Gregory from Goldfrapp has created something I really love, which is typically British in the concept, is the Moog ensemble, where you have like a chamber orchestra, and every member of the orchestra is playing a mini Moog, and then they are playing classical symphonies or classical concertos or whatever, with an ensemble of mini Moog. So the guy is playing with a keyboard, and on the side he has a second chair, and on the second chair you have a mini Moog. I think it's absolutely brilliant.
Wow.
And I think you should organize this with 2600. Let's imagine like 20 or 25 musicians playing with each of them having a 2600. I think that would enhance the statement you are having at the moment, to say that actually, you know, a 2600 can be considered as part of a symphonic orchestra and electronic symphonic orchestra. And I think it would be really cool.
That is really cool. We'll have to talk.
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of 2600 in concert, what was the first time you used a 2600 in concert? Was it the China concerts?
No, it was before. It was the big outdoor concert was at Place de la Concorde in Paris, where we had 1 million people. It was really the first concert involving architecture, giant projections on buildings, and this kind of show what was really the first one of that kind. And then I used my 2600 a lot on stage. That was really the first time that I really used it on stage for a concert like this. But I used it before for smaller gig when Oxygen has been released from 76 onwards.
So I find that very daring in a way, because since you don't have memory didn't have memory of MIDI of those days, there's no patch memory, playing in concert, you have to have some degree of confidence that those happy accidents, which you've mentioned, and are going to be okay.
Yeah, of course, at that time, it was quite risky, more than before, for different reasons. The first problem, as you know, was the temperature, because the components are varying constantly depending on the temperature. And funnily enough, it's safer outside if you don't have rain. That's another story. Otherwise, but if you have a roof, it's okay. But actually, indoor, you have much more problems for silly reasons, because you have very often in theater halls, you have doors from everywhere. And suddenly you have people opening doors and the temperature goes down, and then you're out of tune very easily.
Yeah,
and the trick I was using is actually on ARP. I had like kind of presets by cheating and using one oscillator or two or three. So I have 2 or 3 sounds I could manage to have quite different by just uncabling or cabling very quickly one oscillator or the other one, and using pedals to make the like chorus pedals to make the sound wider, and all kinds of trick to try to actually cheat a little bit, and having not only one sound but a kind of 3 families of sounds that I could tweak live. I mean, it sounds crazy when you in days when now you have thousands of presets and you can have thousands of possibilities on the computer. But of course, because of this, I've always been convinced in any art form that limitations are the most important things. And because of the limitations of the ARP2600, you could do things that you have no idea to do today, because actually, because of the limits, you had to push the boundaries of the instrument and then do things that you could never do if you didn't have these limitations.
I so agree. No, you've been a visual artist in your life, is that correct?
Yes. I even hesitated between painting and music at one stage when I was a kid, young teenager.
The reason I'm asking is because both the discussion about the happy accidents and also the idea that limitations push the boundaries and lend itself to creative solutions is something that I'm familiar with also in the visual art world. And I find that the parallels seem to get closer and closer. It's fascinating.
We couldn't agree more. Yes.
You know, the fact that you are, that place is so important to you, location is so important to you, and combining virtual reality with historical locations is such an ingenious concept. Really fascinating. I enjoyed bringing in the new year, by the way, with you.
Oh, thank you very much. It's but actually we just released right now, and it's I'm not doing any promotion, but just because you're mentioning that, we're just releasing this week the Blu-ray and of the Blu-ray and the binaural version, Dolby Atmos in totally immersive sounds of Welcome to the Other Side. This concert I've done in Notre Dame VR, and I used 2600 also in the process of the music of that. And you know, and this is what is interesting is actually you mentioned that I've always been interested by involving architecture. I was talking about the painting, but actually, if I was not a musician, I would be probably an architect. I think there is lots of similarities between being architecture and music. They're both art forms dealing with space and time, and this is the reason why I always been very interested to deal with architecture, deal with graphics and visuals, with electronic music, and what was an experimentation when I started is becoming now almost a kind of traditional way of showing electronic music through festivals and all that. You cannot imagine electronic music without visuals and stage design. And when I started, I was among the first one, if not really the first one, to do this kind of experimentation outdoor, and also linking monuments such as Notre Dame. That is something I just share with you for 1 second. The idea came along during the pandemic, not giving up, and trying to also create this link with Notre Dame has been weakened, like we have been in its flesh, like we have been in our flesh. And I thought it was quite interesting to share a message of positive message and message of renaissance of ourselves for ourselves and the pandemic, regarding the pandemic, and also renaissance of the cathedral. So it worked quite well, and doing a kind of up-to-date and VR futuristic concert in such a place, Notre Dame being not only Catholic, but it means something everywhere. So it was quite exciting.
The fact that you have experience from early days of sort of almost creating your own units, tell me about any modifications, if any, that you've done on the 2600. I remember a little box, an interview with you with Yoda.
Yeah, I mean, I have on the way. I first of all, I got this black box. I had it's a very simple trick. It's just a big box with a big knob, because actually to play live and to control, for instance, to open the VCF. I thought that to be very precise, just with a horizontal fader was not maybe the most interesting, even if I love having faders on a synthesizer, and this is brilliant. That the first ever synthesizer with faders was the 2600, and for me that opened new doors in terms of creating sounds. But on stage, I needed to be really precise with the opening the VCF, to make a solo we're using with the playing the opening of the VCF like you would do with a wheel. It's something that for me was very practical. So I had this black box. Of course, later on, what we put on the 2600 were the MIDI to get some MIDI control on some of the aspects of the 2600. And before that, before I could get the sequencer, the ARP2600 sequencer, my collaborator at that time, called Michel Guess, a French guy, quite a genius, and actually he was the one who introduced me with the 2600, because he was the one who got the first one from the manufacturer, I don't remember. He was the one who got me in contact with the 2600, and then I was dreaming about having a sequencer with much more than 6 steps or 8 steps or 16 steps. But then we conceived, because it was based on something I used at the Music Research Center, and also influenced by the matrix of the Putney or the AKS, having a sequencer with a giant matrix board where I could have 100 steps and not much more than 16. So you can really create some melodies and some patterns that on the human ear will not being felt as a repetition, because with 100 notes you can really create something which will not, where you not, because it's too long, so long that you don't feel the repetition. And then that was something that, and then we had it was before MIDI, that, and we had to try to find a way to synchronize the sequencer with the 2600 and other instruments. And then we and Michel, my collaborator, find a way to transform the 2600 to have a built-in clock to actually not only being controlled by the sequencer, but also controlling other synthesizers. So through time we found a few tricks to enhance and to change to adapt the 2600 the way depending on my needs.
I'm very interested in your work with Pete Townsend. Pete Townsend, like yourself, has been a longtime ARP user, and I consider among the sort of a group of pioneer musicians that have done breakthrough work using synthesizers in unexpected ways. And I would really like to know about your collaboration, and do you plan on doing another?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a massive fan of Pete, and I told him it was because he's a bit older than me, and I remember that when I was my first rock band, I was not a Beatles guy or a Rolling Stones guy. I was a Who guy, and because these four guys were quite unique because they invented hard rock, they invented the metal, they are the fathers, the godfathers of all different kinds, and punk also. I mean, they had all that. And what was a mystery for with them, these four guys were playing like four soloists, like if they were pretending not listening to the rest of the band. I mean, the drummer was doing solo, the Keith Moon was doing solo at the time, and Whistle was doing bass solos all the time. Daltrey was shouting all the time, and Pete was making noise like if you had the rhythm guitar and the lead guitar with the same guy. And then they created this idea of wall of sound. But at the same time, it was very violent, but very subtle. And you're absolutely right. What he did, the reason why I wanted to involve Pete in this project Electronica with people linked one way or another with electronic music is because, as you said, he's the one who introduced synthesizers in rock music with Baba O'Reilly, which also is something that a lot of people don't know is an homage, is tribute to Terry Riley, and also in an album such as Who's Next, yes. And using it in such a cool way, the sequences and all that, and actually, what the ARP allows is actually you can be also a total beginner. It was the case when he started, like all of us, but also if you have some musical knowledge or sensitivity, you can really go deep and creating something very personal. And you listen to 30 seconds of Pete's works on the 2600 and 2500, it's Pete and nobody else. So it means that, a synthesizer is not a cold machine, as we say. It's a real, very sophisticated music instrument. And it's really strange that even now we are still calling synthesizers machines.
Yes.
We should stop that and starting to say, okay, this is a music instrument. We don't care, but it's just something that is also, but in a sense, it's quite cool for people to say it's a machine because it's linked to a kind of sophisticated, complex instrument. But actually, this is a very good example. And when I worked for this Electronica project with lots of collaborators of different generations, much younger also, and apparently much more geek. But I think Pete is amongst all the people I worked with, is probably the one I'm knowing the most in terms of electronic music, which is quite amazing because it's not his core business, if I could say so, in the musical point of view. And it's more rock, but he has a real knowledge about electronic music, and he got all the plugins of the earth and lots of synthesizers. We could, I think Pete, Vince Clarke and Moby and myself, I think we are competing about the kind of museum we could do with all the instruments we have through time.
Absolutely. So I just want to end with this. One of the things that you said a while back reminded me of one of the ARP marketing statements. And while it seems a little bit shallow to talk about marketing, I think the statement itself is very deep. And that was something that was put in a lot of ads. And it said the most creative part of an ARP synthesizer is you.
Yeah, I think it's very important to it's not nostalgia. It's not with nostalgia at all. But I think that your father was giving this feeling to the musicians, where today, and maybe it was a marketing mistake, saying by actually the instruments is not that important because you are the most important part of it. But these days, technology is trying to convince ourselves and beyond music that the technology is the solution. You are the solution. And depending on how you use technology, and you can use it in a dystopian way or in a positive way, entirely depending on yourself. And this is the reason why electronic music is still very interesting, because it's because of that, because of this ambiguity. Electronic music is probably the most popular music in the world. At the same time, it's still underground. It's very strange because you take rock, you take jazz, was underground. 30 years later, it became classic, like classical music. Rock was rebel, was underground, and it became classic. Electronic music has still this underground touch, even if it's the most popular music in the world. And it's a very interesting question, that. And I think it's based on the fact that a synthesizer leaves choices open, because you can do lots of things with one synthesizer. You can do sound design, you can do a classical piece, you can do jazz, you can do electro or dubstep or whatever. You can really you're not prisoner of one range of sounds. You choose. You becoming your own craftsman, and that is what the main legacy of your father is actually to allow a musician to become his own craftsman, his own painter, to choose the range of colors. And that was before. We are forgetting today that in the past, lots of musicians even never heard their music, because they were writing music on a piece of paper, and then they had to find a publisher, and they had to find somebody paying an orchestra. And if they didn't find, they were not finding a publisher investing to print the scores and then hiring an orchestra, they would never listen to their own music. Where now, with one synth, you can be the composer, the producer, the orchestra, and you can the conductor. You can do everything, and the painter. And this is what your father, amongst others, but your father, especially for me and for lots of other people in the first era and in the history of electronic music, we owe him a lot. And thank you for preserving and enhancing the brand, the reputation, and the importance of your father. It's very important. So thank you for what you're doing for all of us.
You're very welcome. And thank you for continuing to use this wonderful instrument.
You're welcome.